Hatching Twitter, a true story of money, power, friendship, and betrayal by Nick Bilton. Picture this for a second. It's a crisp October morning in San Francisco. You're sitting in your corner office as the chief executive of a company that's literally changing the world. Your name is splashed across headlines everywhere. You're worth over $1 billion, and the platform you created is helping to topple dictatorships on the other side of the globe. This is it, right? The pinnacle of success, the mountaintop. But here's the twist. You're not gazing out the window at your empire below. Instead, you're down on your hands and knees, trembling, reaching for a black wastebasket. Your hands are clammy and shaking as you look up at the woman in your doorway and say, "Get out, I'm going to throw up." This was the brutal reality for Evan Williams, Twitter's chief executive, on October 4, 2010. In less than 60 minutes, he'd have to face his 300 employees and announce he was stepping down. But here's the kicker. This wasn't his decision. He was being forced out in a vicious boardroom coup, orchestrated by the very same people he had hired, mentored, and once considered his closest friends. How does something like this even happen? How does a quiet farm boy from Nebraska build a global communication network, only to find himself exiled from his own creation? That's exactly the story we're diving into today, through Nick Bilton's extraordinary book, Hatching Twitter. This isn't your typical dry business book. It's more like a modern-day Shakespearean tragedy, packed with friendship, backstabbing, wild ambition, and gut-wrenching loss. It's the real story of how a little blue bird learned to fly, and the friends who got thrown from the nest along the way. By the time we're done, you'll understand the chaotic, accidental, and deeply human story behind those 140 characters that completely reshaped how we communicate. And you'll pick up some profound insights about what it truly takes to build something remarkable, and the very real danger of losing yourself in the process. Here's the thing about world-changing inventions. They almost never start with a brilliant eureka moment in some pristine laboratory. More often than not, they're born in the messy, chaotic wreckage of failure. And Twitter's story begins with the slow, agonizing death of a company called Odeo. Odeo was a podcasting platform, and back in the mid-2000s, its founders, the quiet, visionary Evan Williams and the energetic, almost frantic Noah Glass, were convinced they'd stumbled onto the next big thing. But then, in 2005, a giant walked into the room. Steve Jobs stepped onto a stage and casually announced that Apple was integrating podcasts directly into iTunes. Just like that, in a single moment, Odeo became obsolete. It was like trying to sell bottled water next to a free, crystal-clear spring. The company was dying, and everyone could feel it. The tension was especially thick between the two leaders. E.V. Williams, who had already tasted success after creating and selling the revolutionary platform Blogger to Google, was the reluctant chief executive. He was thoughtful and deliberate, but painfully slow to make decisions. Noah Glass, on the other hand, was a hurricane of passion and ideas, but his erratic energy often created more chaos than progress. They were like fire and ice, and the company was stuck in the middle, slowly freezing and burning at the same time. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that the real magic happened. One rainy night in San Francisco, Noah was sitting in his car with a young, quiet programmer from Odeo named Jack Dorsey. They'd just left another night of dancing and drinking, and the conversation shifted, as it often did for them, to their anxieties and loneliness. Jack's marriage was falling apart. This punk rocker coder who'd grown up with a speech impediment and found more comfort with computers than people felt completely lost. He was even considering quitting tech altogether to become a fashion designer. Sitting there in that rain-soaked car, Noah asked him, "What excites you? What do you really want to do?" And Jack started talking about this old idea he'd been carrying around for years, something he called status. The concept was simple, a service where you could use your phone to tell your friends what you were doing at that exact moment. "I'm at work," or "I'm listening to this song." It was inspired by the dispatch systems used by bike messengers, a constant stream of short, real-time updates. At first, Noah thought the idea sounded a bit cold, a bit mechanical, but as he sat there, Feeling the weight of his own crumbling marriage and the dying company, something just clicked. This wasn't just about broadcasting your status. This was about human connection. This was a remedy for loneliness. It was a way to feel closer to your friends, to know you weren't alone, even when you were sitting by yourself, staring at a screen. It was the exact same feeling that had driven EV to create Blogger, a way to connect with the world from the isolation of his apartment. I get it. Noah practically shouted. The idea had found its heartbeat. The next day, they brought the concept to EV and the fourth key player in our story, Biz Stone. Biz was the heart and humor of the group, a former Google employee and close friend of EV's. He was a complete goofball on the surface, a defense mechanism he'd developed to survive a tough childhood. But underneath that exterior, he had a rock-solid moral compass. When Biz heard the idea, Jack's status concept infused with Noah's emotional vision, he was immediately in. EV, seeing a potential lifeboat for his sinking ship, gave the green light for a small team to explore it. The project needed a name. Jack suggested Status. Too boring. Biz threw out SMSSY. Too cutesy. EV even floated Friendstalker, which was immediately shot down. But Noah became completely obsessed. He spent days flipping through a dictionary, hunting for the perfect word. He was looking for something that captured that feeling of a short, insignificant burst of information, a light chirp. And then he found it. Twitch, Twister, and then Twitter. The definition was absolutely perfect. The light chirping sound made by certain birds. And the secondary definition: agitation or excitement, flutter. It felt alive. It felt human. Noah knew, instantly, that this was it. He emailed the group, and after some back and forth, they agreed. They dropped the vowels to get a 5-letter name for text messaging, and TWTTR was born. On March 21, 2006, Jack sent the very first official tweet, "Just setting up my TWTTR." One by one, the others followed. Biz, Noah, Crystal, a designer Jack had a massive crush on, and EV. A brand new form of communication had just flickered into existence, born not from some grand master plan, but from the ashes of failure and a desperate human need for connection. But with creation comes conflict, and the friendships that built Twitter were about to become the first casualties. The tension between EV and Noah, which had been simmering at Odio, finally boiled over. Noah, who had poured his heart and soul into Twitter, who had given it its name and its emotional core, felt he should be the one leading it. But EV was the one with the money, the reputation, and the title of chief executive. Jack, meanwhile, was growing increasingly tired of Noah's chaotic energy and unpredictable behavior. He saw Noah as an obstacle standing in his way. One afternoon, Jack went to EV and delivered an ultimatum. It was a move that would set a dark, ominous precedent for the company's future. He told EV, "If Noah stays, I'm going to leave." For EV, the choice was simple, if absolutely brutal. He needed Jack, the programmer who could actually build the thing. Noah, the passionate but difficult dreamer, was expendable. So one evening, EV took Noah for a walk to the green park benches outside the office, the same benches where he would eventually fire several other employees over the years. He told Noah there was no longer a role for him at the company he had co-founded and named. Noah was absolutely devastated. He pleaded, he argued, but the decision was final. He was out. He'd been betrayed not just by his boss, but by his best friend, Jack, who had secretly handed EV the weapon. Noah Glass, the spiritual father of Twitter, was written out of the story almost before it had even really begun. This was Twitter's original sin, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. With Noah gone, a power vacuum opened up. EV, who hated conflict and was often absent from the office, allowed Jack to step into a leadership position. Twitter was still a tiny, obscure service at this point, a playground for a few thousand tech insiders in San Francisco. Its public debut at a rave called the Love Parade was a complete disaster, ending with Jack getting drunk, falling, and ending up in the hospital with 5 stitches in his head. They'd managed to sign up fewer than 100 new users. It looked like Twitter might just become another quirky, forgotten tech experiment collecting digital dust. And then came South by Southwest. South by Southwest, or as everyone calls it, South by, is an annual tech and music festival in Austin, Texas. In March of 2007, EV had a stroke of genius. He suggested they place large plasma screens in the main hallways of the conference, displaying a live feed of tweets from attendees. Suddenly, the abstract concept of Twitter became a tangible, public conversation happening in real time. People could see their own messages, their own faces, flashing across the screens for everyone to see. It was absolutely irresistible. The service absolutely exploded. Everyone at the conference was talking about it, signing up, and flocking from one party to another, guided by the stream of tweets. By the end of the festival, Twitter had won the award for Best Startup, and Jack, Biz, and EV were on stage accepting it. They were the new kings of the tech world. As they walked up to the stage, they squeezed past Noah, who was sitting with them in the audience as a peace offering from EV, but he wasn't invited up to join them. He was just another face in the crowd, watching his creation take flight without him. The success at South by was a major turning point. It put Twitter on the map, but it also put tremendous strain on its fragile infrastructure. The site, which had been basically hacked together in just 2 weeks, couldn't handle the sudden traffic. It began crashing constantly. Users were greeted with a now famous illustration of a whale being lifted out of the ocean by a flock of tiny birds. It became known as the fail whale, and it became a symbol of Twitter's chaotic, explosive growth. The company was a complete mess, and it desperately needed a real leader. EV, still reluctant to be a full-time chief executive, appointed Jack to the role. But Jack, for all his vision with the initial product, was definitely not a manager. As the company buckled under the pressure, Jack seemed more interested in his side projects. He took yoga classes, drawing classes, and even enrolled in fashion school to learn how to sew, still dreaming of making designer jeans. He'd often leave the office at 6 in the evening, while his engineers were pulling all-nighters, trying to keep the site from completely collapsing. EV grew increasingly frustrated. The site was constantly down, growth was slowing, and Jack seemed distracted and absent. The tension finally exploded in a meeting where EV told him bluntly, "You can either be a dressmaker or the chief executive of Twitter, but you can't be both." The breaking point came when the engineering team discovered something absolutely terrifying. There was no backup of Twitter. If the main database crashed, every single tweet, every user, everything would vanish forever. The board was horrified. Fred Wilson, a key investor, looked at the team and said, "You're kidding me, right?" The board, led by EV, decided they had to make a change. In a tense meeting at the Clift Hotel, they told Jack he was being removed as chief executive. EV would be taking over. Jack felt like he'd been punched in the stomach, as he would later describe it, ironically, borrowing the exact same phrase Steve Jobs used when he was fired from Apple. He was given a silent chairman role, a title with basically no real power, and was effectively exiled from the company he genuinely believed he had invented. The cycle of betrayal had come full circle. The man who had pushed Noah out had now been pushed out himself. Under AV's leadership, Twitter entered its next phase of explosive growth. This was the era of celebrity adoption. Ashton Kutcher and the news network CNN raced to be the first to reach 1 million followers, and then came the biggest star of all, Oprah Winfrey. In April 2009, Oprah announced she would send her first tweet live on her show, and she wanted EV there with her. EV flew to Chicago, nervous but incredibly excited. In front of millions of viewers, he sat next to Oprah as she fumbled with the keyboard and typed out her first message, naturally in all caps. The Oprah effect was immediate and overwhelming. Nearly 500,000 people signed up for Twitter in the first 24 hours alone. The site was absolutely battered, but miraculously, it stayed online. Twitter had officially gone mainstream. But it was also becoming something far more powerful than just a celebrity toy. In June 2009, massive protests erupted in Iran after a disputed presidential election. When the government shut down traditional media outlets and blocked access to Facebook, the Iranian people turned to Twitter. Using the hashtag #IranElection, they shared real-time news, videos, and stories of the violent crackdown with the outside world. It became known as a Twitter revolution. The U.S. State Department even contacted Twitter directly, asking them to delay scheduled site maintenance so the protesters could continue to communicate. It was a profound moment. The silly little status-updating service had transformed into a geopolitical tool, a voice for the oppressed and silenced. But as Twitter was changing the world, another battle was brewing inside its walls. Jack Dorsey was not going to fade away quietly like Noah Glass had. He was plotting his comeback, his revenge. After being ousted, Jack embarked on a remarkable project of complete self-reinvention. He founded a new, incredibly successful company called Square, which revolutionized mobile payments. And he began meticulously modeling himself after his hero Steve Jobs. He started wearing a daily uniform of a Dior shirt and a black blazer. He adopted Jobs' exact vocabulary, calling his products magical, and referring to himself as an editor rather than a chief executive. He even started publicly talking about his admiration for the Beatles, who just happened to be Jobs' favorite band. The tech press, hungry for the next Steve Jobs, absolutely ate it up. They painted him as the singular, visionary genius behind Twitter, a narrative Jack happily encouraged in countless interviews, often downplaying or completely omitting the contributions of EV, Biz, and especially Noah. Meanwhile, back at Twitter headquarters, EV was struggling with his own challenges. He was a brilliant product visionary, but he was not a natural chief executive for a company of Twitter's massive scale. He was indecisive, avoided confrontation, and struggled to manage a rapidly growing team. Senior executives grew increasingly frustrated. The company felt like it was drifting, like a clown car that drove into a gold mine, as Mark Zuckerberg once memorably put it. Jack saw his opening, his opportunity. He began holding secret meetings with these disgruntled executives and board members. He listened sympathetically to their complaints about EV. He positioned himself as the wise, unfairly exiled founder who knew exactly how to save the company. He whispered in their ears, encouraging them to take their concerns directly to the board. It was a slow, methodical, and honestly brilliant campaign to systematically undermine EV. The board, particularly a new investor named Peter Fenton, who had become a fierce ally of Jack's, began to believe that EV was indeed the problem. The whispers grew into a full chorus. The plan was set in motion. In October 2010, the story came full circle in the cruelest way. Bill Campbell, EV's own chief executive coach and mentor, walked into his office and delivered the news that the board wanted him out. Dick Costolo, the chief operating officer and a friend EV had personally hired and mentored, would become the new chief executive. EV was completely blindsided. He was furious and felt utterly betrayed. He fought back hard, but it was too late. Jack had played the game to perfection. At the final board meeting, when the motion was made for EV to resign, the deciding vote to second the motion came from none other than Jack himself. The betrayal was absolutely complete. Dick Costolo took over as the third chief executive, a former improv comedian now tasked with turning the chaotic social experiment into a real, profitable business. Jack returned triumphantly as executive chairman, leading product development and reclaiming his place in the carefully crafted narrative he'd been building. Biz and another key early employee, Jason Goldman, soon left the company, feeling alienated from the new, more corporate culture. And EV, after a brief and essentially powerless stint as head of product, eventually departed as well, leaving behind the company he had financed, nurtured, and led through its most explosive years of growth. The four friends who had once huddled together in coffee shops, dreaming big dreams about changing the world, were now scattered to the winds. The bonds of friendship had been shattered by ambition, jealousy, and billions of dollars. The little blue bird had hatched and learned to fly, but it had left a trail of broken shells and broken hearts scattered in its wake. So what can we actually take away from this incredible, turbulent roller coaster of a story? Hatching Twitter is so much more than just corporate drama. It's a powerful modern parable about creation, ambition, and the complexity of human nature. The first and perhaps most important lesson is about the fundamental tension between vision and execution. You had the dreamers, Noah, with his passionate vision for human connection, Jack with his elegant idea of status updates. They provided that initial spark of inspiration. But then you had the builders, EV, who saw the bigger picture of creating a real-time information network, and Dick, who understood how to transform that network into a sustainable, profitable business. The story powerfully demonstrates that no single person is ever enough. An idea, no matter how brilliant or revolutionary, is completely worthless without the people who can actually build it, scale it, and successfully steer it through challenges. The real tragedy of Twitter is that these different types of people couldn't figure out how to coexist peacefully. They saw each other as threats rather than necessary, complementary partners. The second lesson is one that echoes through countless stories of great success. Your relationships are simultaneously your most fragile and your most valuable asset. The betrayals in this book are honestly breathtaking and hard to read. Jack's cold ultimatum that forced Noah out. Ev's boardroom execution of Jack. And then Jack's long, carefully calculated revenge campaign against EV. It's a stark, uncomfortable reminder that when you mix deep, personal friendships with ultra-high-stakes business, the results can be absolutely devastating. These weren't just colleagues working together. They were best friends who traveled together, partied together, and confided their deepest fears and dreams to one another. But when power, money, and massive egos entered the room, that loyalty crumbled like a sandcastle in the tide. It forces us to ask ourselves some tough questions. What are we personally willing to sacrifice for success? And more importantly, is it actually worth the price we might have to pay? Finally, this story teaches us that sometimes your creation will completely outgrow your original intentions in ways you never imagined. None of the founders, not even in their wildest, most ambitious dreams, could have predicted what Twitter would actually become. They thought they were building a simple, fun tool for friends to share what they were having for lunch or what song they were listening to. But the world grabbed that tool and transformed it into something far bigger. A global newswire, a platform for social revolution, a stage for celebrity culture, and a public square for the entire planet. The users themselves, with their organic invention of the @reply and the hashtag, were actually the ones who truly defined what Twitter became. The greatest lesson here is one of genuine humility. Sometimes, the most important and powerful thing a creator can do is simply get out of the way and let the community take the lead. The story of hatching Twitter is an incredibly messy one. It's not a clean, heroic tale of a lone genius working in isolation. It's a story of collaboration, intense conflict, accidental genius, and profound human flaws on full display. It reminds us that behind every simple, elegant technology we casually use every day, there's a complex, often painful, very human story unfolding behind the scenes. That was a summary of Hatching Twitter by Nick Bilton. We've covered the major plot points and themes today, but a summary is really like looking at a photograph of an incredible journey. The real magic and depth happen when you experience it for yourself, page by page. If this story of ambition, friendship, and betrayal has captured your imagination at all, I genuinely encourage you to pick up a copy of the actual book. It's in the small details, the actual dialogue, and the quiet, heartbreaking moments that the full power of this story truly comes to life. Reading it isn't just learning about how a company was built. It's an unforgettable journey deep into the heart of what drives us to create, and what we risk losing along the way. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and you're hungry for more insights from some of the world's most influential books, please take just a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really lets me know that this work is making a genuine difference for you, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another, potentially life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.